So you're about to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in Barrie. Let's make sure you're not walking into a trap. Hi, I'm Ben Robitaille. I'm a realtor here in Barrie and Simcoe County, and I help families make smart, confident real estate moves. Today, we're cutting through the headlines to show you exactly what's happening in Barrie's real estate market and what you need to check before signing anything. Let's not mess around. Let's dive right into the video. So the very first thing you need to be aware of if you're thinking about buying a house in Barrie is the state of the real estate market. And what I mean by this is, are we in a buyer's market? Are we in a seller's market? Are we somewhere in between? And how do we actually measure this? Because I'm shocked how many people out there just tell me, hey, it feels like a buyer's market. Okay, that's great, but how do you actually know? So what kind of market we're in comes down to the simple principles of supply and demand. How much supply do we have? How many sales are happening? And how do those two compare in relationship to each other? So I like to use a stat called months of inventory, which is where we look at how many active listings are available in a given time period versus how many sales happened in that same time period. So let's say in 1 month we have 10 sales and 20 listings. That would mean we'd have 2 months of inventory because it would take 2 months in theory for the sales rate to eat up all the inventory we have. So keeping that in mind, anything below 3 months of inventory is a seller's market. 3 to 6, balanced. 6+, we're into buyer's territory. So let's actually look at some stats for Barrie. So this includes all property types: vacant land, condos, townhouses, freehold, everything. So when we go ahead and look at months of inventory, we can see that, through the summer, we were actually into a buyer's market in Barrie. So we had 6.69 months of inventory in July. August, we had 6.36. But since then, we've gone down to 5.48 for September and 5.67 for October, which is interesting because if we look over that same time frame, we did see the number of listings come up, but they've come down slightly, but not a whole lot in the last couple months. So what does that mean? The number of transactions has actually gone up a fair amount for this time of year. So statistically in Barrie, we are in a balanced market leaning towards buyers. But I'm sure if you've looked at any number of news headlines lately, you'll see the sky is falling and the market is crashing, when really that's not the case. And in fact, if we dive a little deeper and look at detached properties only, the news is even better. We're at 4, if you're a seller, that is. We're at 4.75 months of inventory. That's right smack in the middle of a balanced market. Now, we talked about how markets feel. It might not feel like a balanced market because for quite some time in the beginning of the pandemic, we were below 1 month of inventory and houses were flying. You basically put a for sale sign in the lawn, a week later the house was sold, no questions asked. This, in my opinion, is a much nicer market to work in. It is a much safer market for both buyers and sellers because people are taking less risk just to get into the market. There are inspections, financing conditions. People are really doing their due diligence. So that's the first thing you need to do. You need to know the state of the market. And in fact, you can even dive into more specific neighborhoods. So if you're looking at Lakeshore or Allendale or Holly or North Bay or wherever you're looking, you can dive deeper into that specific neighborhood to see what the months of inventory are and what kind of market you're in. The next item buyers need to know about are hidden costs and some common mistakes that buyers make. Now, one mistake that even myself working in the industry, myself and my wife made when we bought our house is not knowing for certain whether or not our property taxes were built into our mortgage payment or not. So our first tax bill rolls around of our first year owning the house, and all of a sudden we've got to come up with $900 to pay the first installment of our tax bill. Your tax bill for sure is something you want to know if it's in your mortgage payment or paid directly to the city. Next, when you're buying a home, it's perfectly normal and fine to ask the sellers for a copy of their utility bills. Hot water tanks, for example, are very common to be rented. I've seen those range from $30 to $65 a month, and I've also seen situations where sellers are actually renting an air conditioning unit and a furnace, and it adds up to a total of $250 a month before they even pay for the utility itself. So make sure before you even offer, you've got a good understanding of a ballpark figure of what those utilities are going to cost you on a monthly basis. And then keep in mind costs for maintenance and repairs on your house. It's the little things that add up. The furnace filter, replacing smoke detectors if you have to do that. In our case, moving to a very snowy area, buying a snowblower or buying a lawnmower. You want to make sure that you're ready for these things and you're budgeting extra income to be able to take care of them without stressing you out financially. Also, if you plan on doing any kind of renovations or upgrades to your house, always budget extra. Even if you're DIYing, I've never had anything ever in my life come in under budget. There's always going to be a little tool or item that you forget that you need to run to Home Depot at the very last minute to pick up that's definitely going to run you over budget. So just keep that in mind. The third thing you want to keep in mind before you buy a house is the lifestyle of the neighborhood and whether or not it's a good fit for you. Now, if you're a young family hoping to have kids on the horizon, your needs are going to be vastly different from somebody who, say, doesn't have a car and needs to commute using public transit. This is going to affect a huge number of things like your location and your price point. And not only that, Barrie continues to grow and continues to be a hub for commuter buyers. There's new neighborhoods popping up all over the city. There's talk of an amalgamation of extra land from townships of Springwater to come within the city limits of Barrie. And as hopefully GO train service expands, Barrie is going to become a real popular option for people who are looking to live outside of the city. And with all this in mind, when you're buying your house, you want to make sure that it fits what you're looking to get out of your lifestyle and also your future lifestyle. What I find really helps buyers determine what they're looking for is creating a needs and wants list. Needs are the things that you absolutely cannot live without under any circumstances. So for some people, that's a certain number of bedrooms, certain number of bathrooms, need a garage. Versus the wants, the things that would be nice to have, but you could live without if everything else was checked off. Maybe that's a certain kind of countertop, a certain building layout, or like it would be nice to be in this neighborhood. Having that list makes it easy to reference any listing that comes across your internet browser and filter it out really quick if it's not the right fit. The last thing I want to talk about if you're considering buying is timing and strategy. Now, unlike the cottage country market where we see big peaks and valleys in summer and winter, Barrie's a little bit more constant, but it does still have a busier time of year and slower time of year. What I find is through the fall and winter, you have both buyers and sellers who are a little bit more serious. So that ends up leading to fewer showings, fewer listings, but the transaction volume hangs on fairly well because people are shopping with intent and not just coming around and kicking tires. But with that timing, preparation is the best thing you can do to put forward a strong offer when that right property comes along. This includes a mortgage pre-approval. Now, I could make a whole video on mortgage pre-approvals, but the gist of it is the pre-approval process approves you, the person, whereas the financing condition approves the house to go along with you. So having half of that equation already taken care of is super important before you even consider making the offer. The other thing to consider is know what your negotiation opportunities are. I've seen negotiations come down to a lot more than price. Sometimes it's closing date. Sometimes, although rare, is deposit amount. Sometimes it's certain representations and warranties that the buyer's asking the seller to make. Big thing here is to have a conversation with your realtor before you sit down to write the offer to make sure you're protected in each and every way possible and that your best interests are taken care of. So as a buyer, I hope you found this information helpful. Drop a comment with your biggest question about buying a house in Barrie, and I promise I will reply to every single one. Again, I'm Ben Robitaille, helping you move with confidence in Barrie and Simcoe County, and we'll see you in the next one.